You build a life quietly. You don't announce it. You don't send newsletters. You just work, and work, and work, until one day the work speaks so loudly that no one in the room can pretend they didn't hear it. That's the part they never tell you about, the silence right before everything changes. My older sister's name is Lena. She's 34, 2 years older than me. And for most of my life, I thought that gap was the whole explanation. She got there first. She knew things first. She was ready first. I told myself that's why she'd always looked at me the way she did, like I was a rough draft of something that hadn't quite worked out. Her husband's name is Patrick. He runs a mid-size HVAC company in Charlotte, and he has the handshake of a man who wants you to know he has the handshake of a man who wants you to know he has the handshake of a man. He calls my profession computer stuff, and he says it the way some people say bless your heart. Technically polite, completely dismissive. Their wedding was 5 years ago. I was a bridesmaid. I wore the dusty rose dress that Lena picked for all of us, and I smiled in every photo and I gave a toast that made people cry. 3 days later, I drove back to my apartment in Raleigh with a tank of gas and $68 in my checking account. That detail matters. I want you to hold on to that. I got into cybersecurity by accident, which is how most people who are actually good at something get into it. I wasn't the kid who dreamed of working in tech. I was the kid who read every book in the house twice because we couldn't afford more, and then I found a free online course when I was 19 and I didn't sleep for 3 days because I was genuinely fascinated by how systems fail, how a thing can look perfectly solid from the outside and be completely hollow underneath. I thought about that a lot actually, systems that look solid and are hollow underneath. By 26, I had my first full-time role as a security analyst. By 28, I was leading a small team. By 30, I was being asked to speak at regional conferences. None of this happened fast. None of it was loud. I just kept showing up, kept learning, yes to the hard problems. My family knew I worked in tech. That was roughly the extent of what they understood, and most of them hadn't tried to understand further. My mum would sometimes tell her friends I worked with computers. My aunt asked me once if I could fix her printer. Patrick, at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, asked me if I'd ever thought about a more stable career, something you could actually build on. I smiled. I passed the sweet potatoes. I filed it away somewhere. The invitation to my cousin Garrett's engagement party came in a cream envelope with our family name written in calligraphy. Garrett is Lena's age, 34, the son of my dad's brother, and he'd been with his fiancée Priya for 6 years. The party was at his parents' house in Lake Norman, a house with a dock and a boat, and the kind of landscaping that gets photographed for neighborhood association newsletters. I almost didn't go. I want to be honest about that. Not because I was afraid of them. I was past afraid, but I'd done the math, the emotional math, and attending a 4-hour family event where I'd have to explain myself and deflect comments and keep my face neutral, it had a cost. I knew exactly what it would cost. I went because of Garrett. He was always the cousin who actually asked follow-up questions. When I told him 2 years ago that I'd been promoted, he'd said, "What does that actually mean? What do you do now?" And then he'd listen to the whole answer. That's rarer than it sounds. I put on a navy wrap dress, drove 90 minutes, and told myself to keep my expectations at 0. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Strings of lights over the back patio, a caterer arranging things on a long table, Priya's family on one side and our family on the other, with that slightly formal energy of 2 groups still figuring out how to be in a room together. I found Garrett immediately. He hugged me like he meant it and said, "You came, I wasn't sure you would." And I said, "Of course, because it was easier than the truth, and the truth was only half-formed anyway." Priya was warm and beautiful and clearly nervous in the best way, the way you're nervous when something is actually good and you don't want to mess it up. I liked her within 2 minutes. Then Lena found me. She was wearing a white linen jumpsuit. Her hair was blown out. She had the look she always has at family events, the look of someone who arrived first and has been quietly keeping score ever since. You made it, she said, not warmly. The way you say it when you're not entirely rooting for the person to make it. I made it, I said. She looked me over, not cruelly. She's never been cruel the way someone with a bad temper is cruel. She's surgical. She looked at my dress and my shoes and my face, and then she said, "You look tired. Are you sleeping okay? The skin under your eyes." "I'm great," I said. "You look great too." She held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then she smiled and moved on. Patrick found me 20 minutes later at the food table. He had a beer in one hand and the energy of a man who'd already had two. "Still doing the cybersecurity thing?" he asked. "Still doing it," I said. "I keep hearing that's like a hot job market right now. You thinking about going somewhere bigger, like a real tech company?" He said real the way you would italicize something. "I'm pretty happy where I am," I said. Sure. He nodded slowly the way people nod when they've already decided you're underestimating yourself. "I'm just saying, you're smart. You could probably do more." I picked up a shrimp. I put it in my mouth. I looked at the lake. The comment that I remember most didn't come from Lena or Patrick. It came from my aunt, my dad's sister, Ruth Ann, who is 61 years old and has the specific confidence of someone who has never once been wrong in her own mind. She came up to me near the end of the first hour, and she hugged me and she held me at arm's length and she said, "You know what I think? I think you need to stop hiding in that little apartment in Raleigh, working on computers and just live your life. Find someone, have a family. The career stuff isn't everything." I counted 3 seconds before responding. "I'm living my life," I said. "You know what I mean," she said. I did know what she meant, and I also knew that in the past calendar year I had bought my own home, been named a principal investigator on a federally funded research project, spoken at a conference in Denver, and quietly turned down a job offer that would have required me to relocate to San Francisco because I actually like North Carolina. None of this had come up at any family event because no one had asked. I don't volunteer information that hasn't been requested. It's not modesty. It's just that I learned early that my accomplishments made certain people in this family uncomfortable in a way they'd express as concern for me, and I'd grown tired of being on the receiving end of concern that was actually just discomfort. Ruth Ann patted my arm and went to refill her wine. I stood there by the railing and looked at the water for a moment. The sun was getting low. Somebody's kid was throwing rocks off the dock. Garrett and Priya were laughing about something with her parents, their heads tipped together. I thought I could leave right now and no one would notice for an hour. I stayed. The reason I stayed wasn't pride exactly. It was something quieter than pride. It was that I'd spent a long time leaving rooms early, removing myself from situations, making myself smaller to avoid friction. And I'd gotten tired of the way that felt. Like I was always the one who had to disappear. So I got a sparkling water and I found a chair and I watched the sky turn pink over the lake and I thought about the thing I wasn't supposed to think about tonight. 3 weeks earlier, I'd been asked to be the keynote speaker at the Southeast Regional Cybersecurity Summit. The conference is the largest of its kind in the region, hosted by a coalition of universities, private sector companies, and government agencies. It happens every 18 months. The previous keynote speakers had been people with decades more experience than me. I was 32. I would be the youngest keynote speaker in the summit's history. I hadn't told anyone in my family. Not because I was ashamed, because they would have asked questions that revealed how little they'd been paying attention, and it would have been exhausting, and I wasn't ready to be exhausted by it yet. I was going to tell them eventually. I just hadn't found the right moment, the right context, the right version of my own story that wouldn't make me feel like I was asking them to be proud of me. There's something painful about needing someone to be proud of you who doesn't quite understand what you do. The part of the evening I did not expect happened at 8:15, near the end, when people were starting to say their goodbyes and the caterers were quietly clearing the food. I was talking with Priya's younger brother. I'll call him Dev because he was lovely and this story isn't about him. About the difference between machine learning and AI, a conversation he'd actually initiated and was genuinely curious about. And I was in the middle of explaining something when I heard Lena's voice carrying from across the patio. She was talking to Patrick and to Ruthann and to another cousin, Jess, and she wasn't being quiet. I just looked it up, she was saying. The summit thing, they're accepting proposals right now. Application closes in 2 weeks. I stopped listening to Dev. Or rather, I kept nodding at Dev, but I wasn't hearing him anymore. You should apply, Ruthann said to Lena. You'd be great. It's like a speaking opportunity, Lena said, for professionals in tech and security. I've been in project management for 8 years. That qualifies. Patrick said something I couldn't hear. Lena laughed. It would be good for visibility, she said. I've been thinking about pivoting anyway. I need something that gets me in front of the right people. She pulled out her phone. She was already looking at the application. I turned back to Dev. My face was completely still. I've always been good at keeping my face completely still. Sorry, I said. You were saying? I should explain what the summit application actually involves because it matters. The summit has 2 types of participants. There are general session speakers, practitioners who submit proposals and go through a jury review process. And then there's the keynote, which is invitation only. I had already received my invitation. I had already confirmed. My name was already on the internal planning documents. The conference was 11 weeks away. The general session proposal process, which my sister had just found on her phone, was indeed open. What the website didn't say clearly. What you'd only know if you were actually embedded in this industry, if you'd been to previous conferences, if you had relationships with the organising committee, was that the general session slots were almost entirely allocated. The open application was largely a formality at this point, a pipeline for future years. Getting selected as an outside applicant with no prior summit relationship 2 weeks before the deadline was not impossible, but it was very unlikely. My sister did not know any of this. She had been in project management for 8 years. Her company used a lot of software. She had been to conferences for project managers. I looked at the lake. A heron stood at the edge of the dock. It stood perfectly still. I thought about saying something. I thought about it for about 4 seconds. I didn't say anything. I drove home with the windows down. The highway at 9 p.m. is its own kind of quiet. Not silent, but the hum of it is steady, and steady things are easier to be alone with than silence. I thought about my sister applying for a summit that I was keynoting. I thought about the specific shape of that irony. Then I thought about something else. About what would happen. Not if. When. Because she was going to apply. I could see that she'd already decided, and when she applied, someone on the organising committee was going to see her last name. And they were going to think, that's the same last name as our keynote speaker. And then one of 2 things would happen. Either they'd reach out to her directly, or they'd reach out to me. Either way, she was going to find out. I drove and I thought about that and I felt something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't satisfaction. It was more like watching a door slowly swing open that you'd forgotten you'd unlocked. The call came on a Wednesday. 11 days later, I was at my desk eating a sandwich when my phone lit up with a number I recognised, the lead coordinator for the summit. A woman named Diane, who I'd spoken with several times during the planning process. Hey, she said. So this is a little awkward, and I want to be transparent with you. We received an application for a general session slot from someone with your last name. Different first name. She listed project management credentials. She didn't mention any relation to you. I put my sandwich down. That's my sister, I said. Diane paused. I see. She doesn't know I'm keynoting, I said. We don't. We're not close. She's not in this field. I don't think she understood what she was applying to. Understood. Diane's tone was careful but kind. She's not going to be selected for a slot. That was clear before we saw the name, but I wanted to let you know and I wanted to ask, how do you want us to handle the communication with her? I thought about it. The standard response, I said, whatever you'd send anyone who wasn't selected, I'll handle the rest. I called Lena that night. This is the part people always ask about. What did you say? How did it go? And I understand why they ask, because it's the part that sounds like it should be cinematic. Two sisters, one phone call, everything finally said. It wasn't like that. She picked up on the third ring. I could hear the TV in the background, something with a laugh track. "Hey," she said, "what's up?" "I wanted to tell you something," I said. "I should have told you sooner. I'm the keynote speaker at the Southeast Regional Cybersecurity Summit this fall. I got the invitation about 6 months ago. I confirmed a few months back. I'm going to be the youngest keynote in the conference's history." Silence. Not a dramatic silence. Just the silence of someone's brain rearranging what it thought it knew. "Okay," she said. "I wanted you to know," I said, "because I think you applied for a speaking slot there, and I think you're going to get a rejection email, and I didn't want that to be the way you found out." More silence. "How did you know I applied?" she asked. "Someone from the organising committee called me. They saw the last name." The laugh track played in the background. "So you knew," she said slowly. "At the party, when I was talking about it." "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" "No." She was quiet for a long time. I let her be quiet. I'd learned a long time ago that Lena's silences were where she did her most important thinking. "Why didn't you say anything?" she asked. "Not angry?" "Something more complicated than angry." "I wasn't sure it was my place," I said. "And honestly, I think part of me wanted you to find out on your own. I'm not proud of that part, but I'm telling you now." "You're the keynote," she said. "Yes." "At the conference I applied to." "Yes." Another pause. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know that's what you did. I didn't know you were. I didn't know that. And here is the thing about my sister. Here is the thing I've known for a long time and never quite known how to say. She isn't a bad person. She isn't even, at her core, a cruel person. She's someone who filled in the blanks about me with assumptions, and then she stopped checking whether the assumptions were right. She decided who I was when I was 22, and she never updated the file." "I know you didn't," I said. "I told Ruth-Ann I was going to apply," she said. "She thought it was a good idea." "I know." "She's going to." Lena stopped, started again. "She's going to think it's so, she's going to think it's funny. She's going to make it into a thing." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe you just tell her it wasn't the right fit." Silence. "I'm proud of you," she said finally. The words sounded slightly difficult, like they were heavier than normal words. I should have been asking more questions about what you were actually doing." I looked at the wall of my home office. There's a framed photo there from the Denver conference. Me at the podium, mid-sentence, completely in my element. My friend from grad school took it and sent it to me, and I put it up not to show off, but because it's the only photo I've ever seen of myself where I look like exactly who I am. "You can start now," I said, "if you want." The summit was on a Saturday in October. The venue was the convention center in downtown Raleigh, 40 minutes from my house, which felt like a gift. I got there at 7 in the morning. The hall was still mostly empty, just the setup crew and the AV team and Diane, who handed me a coffee and walked me through the stage configuration. My session started at 10. By 9:45, the main hall was full. I stood in the back corridor and looked out at the crowd through a gap in the curtain. About 800 people, give or take, spread across tiered seating, badges catching the light. Diane put her hand on my arm. "You good?" "Yeah," I said. She introduced me. I heard my name and my title and the phrase youngest keynote in the summit's history, and then I walked out into the light and the applause, and I went to the podium and I looked out at 800 faces. In the third row, I saw Lena. She told me 2 weeks before that she wanted to come. She said it the way you say something when you're slightly afraid the offer will be refused. Quickly, with minimal eye contact. I'd said yes. I'd put her on the guest list. She'd brought Patrick. He was sitting next to her in a jacket and tie, which I don't think I'd ever seen him wear voluntarily. He looked slightly stunned, the way people look when the room they've walked into is significantly larger than the one they imagined. Ruth-Ann was not there. I don't know if Lena told her or not. I didn't ask. I looked to my sister in the third row. She was looking back at me. Her face was open in a way I hadn't seen in years, not performing anything, not calculating anything, just looking. I looked at her for 1 second, then I looked out at the rest of the room and I began. I won't tell you the whole talk. It ran 45 minutes and covered systemic vulnerability patterns in mid-size enterprise infrastructure, which is either fascinating or completely opaque depending on your relationship to the subject. The audience seemed to find it fascinating. There were moments where I could feel the room holding its breath. I've given a lot of talks. I know how a room feels when it's with you. This room was with me. At the end, during the Q&A, someone asked me who I'd been inspired by early in my career, who'd pushed me, and I said, truthfully, that I'd been more motivated by the people who'd underestimated me than the ones who'd believed in me, that there's a particular kind of fuel in being dismissed if you can find a way to use it constructively and not let it turn into bitterness. Bitterness is expensive, I said. It costs more than it's worth. There was a pause, and then someone started clapping, and then the whole room was clapping, and I stood at the podium, and I didn't look at my sister, but I felt, in a way I can't exactly explain, that she heard it. After the formal program ended, there was a reception in the hall adjacent. I spent 90 minutes talking to researchers and practitioners and a few graduate students who wanted to ask every question they'd stored up. I loved that part. I could do that part for hours. Eventually, Lena found me near the far wall. Patrick was a few steps behind her. He looked different from how he'd looked at the party, at Thanksgiving, at every family event where he'd looked at me with that particular brand of absent-minded condescension. He didn't look condescending. He looked genuinely uncertain how to stand. Lena hugged me, a real hug, not the sideways thing we usually do. That was incredible, she said into my shoulder. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. When she stepped back, her eyes were bright. Not crying. Just bright. Patrick extended his hand. That was really impressive, he said. I had no idea that was the kind of work you were doing. I'm sorry I didn't. He stopped. Started again. I should have asked more. I shook his hand. It's okay, I said, because it was, finally, becoming okay. The drive home from the conference took 40 minutes because of a backup near the interchange. I sat in slow traffic with the radio off, and I thought about a specific detail from that evening at the lake party. The moment I'd stood alone at the railing and thought about leaving, I thought about all the times I'd left early, all the rooms I'd removed myself from. I had stopped doing that. I'd made a choice to stop doing that 2 years ago, and I hadn't told anyone I'd made that choice, because it wasn't the kind of thing you announce. You just start staying. You just start taking up the space. The traffic cleared. I drove the last 20 minutes with the windows down, the October air cool and smelling like cut grass, and something burning somewhere in the pleasant way that October always does. I thought about what Lena had said on the phone. I should have been asking more questions. It's a small thing to say. It's also the right thing to say. And I'd learned over the years to know the difference between the right thing said too late and the right thing said just in time. This one still felt like just in time. I got home, fed my cat, made tea, and sat on the back porch for an hour watching the stars and not thinking about anything in particular. That's what it feels like when something finally resolves. Not like winning, like exhaling. You build a life quietly, and then one day you realize you don't have to be quiet about it anymore. I thought a lot about the moment Lena saw my name on that podium banner. Not in a gloating way. I'm past that, or I'm trying to be. But in the way you think about a door finally swinging open that you've quietly been leaning against for years. What I keep coming back to is this. None of what happened that day in the convention centre was accidental. It wasn't luck, and it wasn't timing. It was the sum of 1,000 small choices made when no one was watching. The online course at 19, the conference proposals I submitted and got rejected before I got accepted, the job offer I turned down because it didn't feel right even though the money was better, the Tuesday evenings I spent reading research papers instead of watching TV. Nobody saw any of that. Nobody asked about any of that. And for a long time I think I believed that if no one witnessed the work, it somehow counted less. It doesn't. That's the thing I know now that I didn't know at 22. The work counts whether or not anyone is looking. It accumulates, it compounds, and eventually it becomes something so undeniable that even the people who decided not to see it can't look away. Lena didn't set out to diminish me, I think. She filled in a story about who I was, and then she just stopped updating it. That's a different kind of harm than cruelty, but it's still harm. When someone decides they know you and stops actually looking at you, you become a fixed thing in their mind, a past tense version of yourself, and there's something quietly painful about being loved by someone who loves an old draft of you. What changed things wasn't the conference, it was the phone call before it. It was me choosing to tell her the truth before the situation forced it. Choosing transparency even when I didn't have to, even when part of me wanted to let the irony play out in silence. That choice cost me something small and gave back something larger. It gave us a place to start over from. Patrick surprised me too. I'd written him off so completely in my mind that his genuine uncertainty that day, the way he didn't know how to stand in that room, actually moved me a little. People can surprise you when you give them a real reason to reconsider. Not a lecture, not a confrontation, just evidence. Just showing up fully and letting that be enough. The hardest thing about being underestimated by people you love is that you have two choices about what to do with it. You can let it make you bitter, which is understandable and which will cost you more than them, or you can let it make you disciplined. Let it sharpen your focus. Let it teach you the value of building something so solid that the dismissal eventually becomes embarrassing for the person who offered it. I chose discipline, not because I'm noble, because business is exhausting and I had work to do. Ruth Ann wasn't at the conference. I don't know what Lena told her. I found that I didn't need to know. That was new for me. Genuinely not needing the last word. Genuinely not needing the last word. Genuinely not needing the full account settled. Some things resolve themselves quietly. You just have to be patient enough to let them. I sat on my porch that October night and I thought about the $68 in my checking account on the drive home from Lena's wedding 5 years earlier. I thought about how far that felt and how fast it had moved once I stopped waiting for someone to give me permission to take up space. You don't need permission. You never did. You just need to keep going long enough for that to become obvious.